حي على الفلاح.
He came back at the Prophet ﷺ and attacked the character of the Prophet ﷺ. He called him a liar, he called him crazy, he reprimanded him publicly, and everybody dispersed from there. What's very interesting is that while many people did not speak up in support of the Prophet ﷺ, in the public gathering it was Ali radiallahu anhu, and one other narration tells us that it was Abu Talib. Nobody really spoke up in defense of the Prophet ﷺ, but at the same time nobody else spoke up against him either. Which tells you a little bit about that they were hesitant to attack the Prophet ﷺ because this was somebody that they really had no grounds to attack. There was no dirt that they had on him. There was nothing to really attack about him. This was a man of the highest caliber, the highest character, the greatest nobility, total honesty, truth, trustworthiness. What was there to say about him? And so everyone dispersed from there, while they did not speak up in defense of him, but because of the character of the Prophet ﷺ, they also couldn't say anything bad about him. Abu Lahab was very irrational. But now that the message was public, when the Prophet ﷺ would even go to the public places, he would go to the town square, he would go to the marketplaces, and he would want to try to talk to people about the message. You know, the line that the Prophet ﷺ would open with, he would say, Ya ayyuhan nas, O people, say La ilaha illallah. Say there is no one worthy of worship but God, but Allah alone. And you will find success. That he consistently kept calling people to Allah, night and day, quietly and publicly. The Prophet ﷺ started preaching, started teaching, started talking about his message. And similarly, people who opposed him, first and foremost, beginning with his own uncle Abu Lahab, he also began to openly oppose him, and criticize him, and slander him, and insult him, and vilify him, and demonize him in the eyes of the people. And there are multiple narrations which talk about this. His name, his actual legal name was Abdul Uzza. He was the son of Abdul Muttalib, a direct uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, his father's older brother. He was called Abu Lahab because of his complexion. He was very light in complexion, but he was said to have his cheeks were very red. That was his complexion, and he was also a very intense individual. When he would speak, he would become very intense, and his face would become very red. And so Lahab is literally what is called a burning amber, a red burning coal. And so he was called Abu Lahab because his face would look like it had like a fire inside of it. And he was very wealthy, and he was very powerful and influential. He was considered a leader of Quraysh at some level, but he was not a civil leader like Abu Talib was. He was not a civil leader. He wasn't very active in the service of his community like Abu Talib was. Abu Lahab was more of a business leader. He committed the majority of his energy to succeeding in business, in the business arena. So he was a leader economically of Quraysh. And that's how he was leveraging his power and his influence. And his wife was known as Jamil. Her name was Arwa bint Harb bin Umayyah, Ukhtu Abi Sufyan. She was a sister of Abu Sufyan. So you can see they were a bit of a power couple. Abu Lahab, powerful businessman, head of the businessman's club or affiliation or alliance in Quraysh in Mecca. His wife is the sister of Abu Sufyan, the daughter of Harb bin Umayyah. So she's also a very powerful woman. She's a wife of Abu Lahab, one of the wealthiest women. She's the sister of Abu Sufyan, who is a political leader of Quraysh and of Mecca and therefore of Arabia. All eyes are on him. Her father was also a very influential man. So you can now imagine the level of influence this woman has. So both of these individuals, this couple, Abu Lahab and his wife Jamil, or Arwa bint Harb, they basically made it their life mission to oppose the Prophet ﷺ. And Abu Lahab started deriding, started publicly degrading, started publicly insulting and slandering, trying to humiliate the Prophet ﷺ. Arwa, this woman, the wife of Abu Lahab, took it upon herself to make his life difficult. She would throw her trash. It's actually said that Abu Lahab was the neighbor of the Prophet ﷺ. He lived next door to him. She would go and she would throw trash on the doorstep of the Prophet ﷺ. When she would see him in public, she would pick up dirt and she would throw it on the clothes of the Prophet ﷺ to make his clothes appear dirty so that people would look down on him. And she started making the life of the Prophet ﷺ very, very difficult. And she started talking bad about the Prophet ﷺ. And this is basically what they committed their life to. They started opposing the Prophet ﷺ. There are interesting narrations in which Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, rahimahullah ta'ala, mentions in a narration in his Musnad that a man reports that Rabi'at ibn Ibad, he reports, and this is before he was Muslim, later on he accepted Islam. I remember seeing the Prophet ﷺ before I accepted Islam, in the days of my Jahiliyyah, before I accepted Islam. I saw him in the marketplace. The Prophet ﷺ would go outside of Makkah to these marketplaces because in Makkah the Quraysh would not let him preach. He says, I remember seeing him say to the people, Ya ayyuhan nas, O people, say la ilaha illallah, say there is no one worthy of worship but God alone. And tuflihu, you will find success in this life and the next. And the people started to gather up around him to listen to him. And behind him would approach a man. And this man had a very bright, open face. Had a very fair complexion. And this man had very bright cheeks. And he would run up behind the Prophet ﷺ and he would say, this man has abandoned the religion of his forefathers. And this man is a liar. Do not let this man deceive you. Do not let this man deter you and deceive you and remove you from the religion of your forefathers. From your religion, the religion of your forefathers. He would run up screaming this behind the Prophet ﷺ. He would follow the Prophet ﷺ no matter wherever he went. I asked, who is this? What's going on here? Like I wasn't even, I heard the message of the Prophet ﷺ, but the behavior of the man was even more bizarre. The elder gentleman's behavior was even more bizarre than what this man was saying. So I asked, who's this old man? Why does he act this way? هَذَا عَمُّهُ Abu Lahab. And they said, this is his uncle Abu Lahab. And there are other narrations as well that talk about Abu Lahab literally following the Prophet ﷺ around throughout the marketplace, carrying a sack of stones, pebbles. And as he was walking to distract the Prophet ﷺ, because the Prophet ﷺ would begin to engage in intelligent, enlightening conversation with an individual, he would stop and begin telling them, explaining the Qur'an to them, that Abu Lahab would take these pebbles and start to throw them at the back of the head of the Prophet ﷺ. And you can imagine how disturbing and distracting and how frustrating that would be. And he would start to scream and interrupt the Prophet ﷺ's conversation with people and say, don't listen to him, I know him, he's my nephew. This is the son of my brother, I am his uncle, I know him better than you do. He is crazy, he is a liar, he is a magician, don't listen to him. And he would literally follow the Prophet ﷺ follow him around doing this all day long. And he becomes so disruptive of a force. And his wife is also continuing to escalate her opposition to the Prophet ﷺ. She comes every single day, throws trash on the doorstep of the Prophet ﷺ, throws trash on the Prophet ﷺ. And this couple had made it the mission and objective of their lives to do this. Now there's two different sequences in the narration here. I'll give you the more popularly mentioned sequence, and then I'll tell you the other sequence. The first sequence is that the Prophet ﷺ literally went about his business. He kept doing what he had to do. Angels kept ignoring them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed a surah in the Qur'an. A surah that we know as Surah Al-Lahab. تَبَّتْ يَدَا أَبِي لَهَبٍ وَتَبَّ. That may Abu Lahab be ruined. That Abu Lahab is cursed. Abu Lahab is ruined. He's destroyed. مَا أَغْنَى عَنْهُ مَالُهُ وَمَا كَسَبْ. that what his wealth and what he earns will not help him in the least bit. And he prides himself on different things. He prides himself on his wealth. He prides himself on his economic influence on the marketplace in Mecca. That's why Allah talked about his wealth. And وَمَا كَسَبْ, that's why Allah talked about his ability to earn a living, his ability to do business, because he was throwing his weight around. Like, you don't want to oppose Muhammad? You want to believe in Muhammad? Well, you ain't going to be able to do business with me no more. You sure you want to do that? You sure you want to make an enemy who is the most powerful businessman in Mecca? سَيَصْلَى نَارًا ذَاتَ لَهَابٍ. And then he also prided himself on his looks. Everyone talked about his looks. Abu Lahab, fiery man. The man with fire inside of his cheeks and his face. So Allah said, he will be burned inside of a fire that will have these burning ambers. وَامْرَأَتُهُ. Oh, and we haven't forgotten about his wife. Throws trash on the beloved of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. حَمَّالَةَ الْحَطَبِ. Today she carries the trash from her home to the house of the Prophet ﷺ. On the day of judgment and in the life of the hereafter, she will carry the firewood, she will carry the stones that will continue to burn the flames in the fire of hell. And she will carry those stones on her neck, on her back. فِي جِيدِهَا حَبْلٌ مِّن مَّسَدٍ. And around her neck will be a rope and a shackle. She will have one like that made out of fire around her neck. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came to the defense of the Prophet ﷺ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reprimanded these people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put those people in check. Now this is why I was saying this is one sequence. So this is what happens now. Of course, this is a surah of the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ recites it, mentions it to the scribes of divine revelation, to the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. The word gets out. Abu Lahab hears about it. His wife hears about it. They're enraged. At this point in time, two daughters of the Prophet ﷺ, Kulthum and Ruqayyah, they were either engaged to be married, or the formal English term is betrothed to the two sons of Abu Lahab. Let me explain what that means. It's not quite exactly what we think of an engagement, but what we basically call like the nikah. Marriage had not been consummated yet. That had not occurred yet. Abu Lahab, furious at this time, goes to his two sons, and the name of the two sons were Utbah and Utaybah. He goes to his two sons and he says that you right now, right here, immediately will go over to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and you will break it off with his daughters. And you will humiliate him when you do it. And some of the more detailed narrations tell us that one of the sons came to the Prophet ﷺ, had some level of dignity, and came and said, it's over. My father said I have to come here, my mom said I have to come here and say it's over. And that's it, and he just left. And the narration goes on to mention that the other son came to the Prophet ﷺ, grabbed him by his shirt, ripped his shirt, spit on him, cursed him, and said, keep your daughter at home. I'm done with her, I'm through with her. And humiliated a father in this way. And the Prophet ﷺ was very deeply hurt by this. You had the own uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Lahab, who the Prophet ﷺ would have hoped that as influential as he was, he would be a voice on the side of the Prophet ﷺ, campaigning for the Prophet ﷺ, standing by the side of the Prophet ﷺ, putting an arm around him, saying, I got his back. But he was the most vocal. He did not wait for a day. He lashed out, jumped at the opportunity to be able to not just say, I don't agree with him, but then to curse him out in public, to humiliate him in public, to disrespect him, to throw dirt at him, to throw rocks at him, to curse him, to slander him, to launch a campaign against him, and not only that, but attack his own children. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ was dealing with.